In 1977, the head of Digital Equipment Corporation, then one of the most successful and respected computer companies in the world, said publicly that there was no reason for any individual to have a computer in their own home. His name was Ken Olsen, and at the time, DEC dominated the market for mini-computers, the mid-sized machines used heavily by businesses, universities, and research labs throughout the 1960s and 70s. Olsen and co-founder Harlan Anderson had built DEC starting in 1957, and by the mid-1960s, the company's PDP series of minicomputers, especially the hugely influential PDP-8, had reshaped the entire industry, making real computing power affordable to organizations that could never have justified a giant mainframe. By the early 1980s, DEC's later VAX line of machines had made it the second largest computer company in the world by revenue, trailing only IBM itself, a genuinely dominant, wildly profitable position built on real engineering excellence, not luck. That statement about home computers wasn't idle arrogance pulled from nowhere. It reflected genuine, well-earned confidence built directly on real, current success. It's worth noting, in fairness to Olsen, that he and his defenders later argued the quote was taken out of context, delivered at a World Future Society convention discussing centralized home automation computers controlling every appliance in a house, not personal computers as we came to know them. Whatever the original intent, the quote stuck, and the broader pattern it came to represent, a dominant company dismissing a smaller, unfamiliar market, turned out to be exactly what happened to DEC regardless of what Olsen precisely meant in that one sentence. Inside DEC at the time, personal computers were widely viewed as toys, a hobbyist curiosity beneath the attention of a serious computing company building machines for serious institutional customers. Within roughly a decade, personal computers built by companies that took the home and small business market seriously, first Apple, and then a wave of IBM-compatible machines running Microsoft software, became the dominant force across the entire computing industry, while DEC's core business shrank steadily as the market it had once effectively owned moved somewhere the company's own leadership had publicly dismissed as unserious. DEC was eventually acquired by Compaq in 1998 for roughly $9.6 billion, itself once one of the largest technology acquisitions in history, a quiet, almost anticlimactic end for a company that had genuinely defined an entire era of computing at its peak. Compaq itself later merged into Hewlett-Packard in 2002, folding what remained of DEC's legacy even further into computing history. Here's the part of this story that gets misunderstood almost every time it's retold as a simple, arrogant executive was wrong anecdote. The dangerous pattern here isn't arrogance in the abstract, and treating it that way misses the actual, useful lesson entirely. DEC's confidence in 1977 was fully justified by their real, current results at the exact moment that dismissal was made. Their existing minicomputer business was genuinely strong, dominant even, and that strength is precisely what made an emerging, unproven, much smaller-looking market appear unserious by direct, immediate comparison. A management team evaluating a brand-new opportunity almost never compares it to some abstract ideal. They compare it to the extremely profitable, well-understood business sitting right in front of them. And against that specific comparison, almost any genuinely new market looks small, messy, and beneath serious institutional attention in its early years. This exact pattern has a name in business and innovation research, popularized by Harvard professor Clayton Christensen, and sometimes called the innovator's dilemma, the well-documented tendency for successful, well-run companies to systematically underinvest in smaller, newer markets precisely because their existing, larger markets look more attractive by every conventional metric leadership is already using to make decisions. The strong current performance isn't a distraction from seeing the shift coming. It's the actual mechanism that hides it. Leadership teams don't usually miss a coming shift because they're incompetent or lazy. They miss it because their own current success is quietly and systematically training them to apply the wrong comparison to the thing that's about to replace it. This shows up constantly in far more ordinary settings than 1970s mainframe computing. A retailer with a genuinely excellent, highly profitable physical store network can look at early online sales numbers and reasonably conclude, using their own real, current data, that online retail isn't worth serious internal investment yet, right up until it's the majority of the market. A professional services firm with a highly profitable consulting practice can look at an early, unpolished automation tool threatening to shrink some of that billable work and reasonably conclude, using their own real current revenue, that the tool isn't a serious threat worth reorganizing around yet. In every one of these cases, the leadership team isn't stupid, and they aren't ignoring real data. They're comparing an early, unproven opportunity against their own genuinely excellent current results, and by that specific comparison, the new opportunity keeps losing, right up until the moment it's already too late to catch up. What's worth sitting with here, the part that makes this genuinely uncomfortable rather than just a fun historical anecdote, is that this isn't a trap for weak or badly run companies. It's specifically a trap for strong ones, the kind currently winning by every metric they're tracking, which is exactly why it keeps happening to smart, capable leadership teams generation after generation instead of getting solved once and staying solved. The confidence that comes from real, current, well-earned success is often the very thing that makes a genuine coming shift the hardest thing in the world to see clearly while there's still time to act on it. So here's the actual, practical move for any manager or executive sitting on a genuinely strong, currently profitable business. The next time your own current results make some unfamiliar, smaller-looking opportunity seem small and unserious by comparison, treat that exact feeling as a direct signal to look closer, not as confirmation that you can safely look away. DEC's own success is exactly what made the personal computer look small. That's the whole trap, and it's still running today, just wearing a different industry's clothes. DEC's decline wasn't a single missed market either. The company also struggled to respond to the rise of powerful engineering workstations from newer competitors like Sun Microsystems in the 1980s, a smaller, faster-moving market that again looked unattractive next to DEC's much larger existing mini-computer revenue at the time leadership was making that call. Clayton Christensen's original research on this pattern famously used the disk drive industry as its core example, showing how established manufacturers kept losing to smaller competitors who started in a tiny, seemingly unattractive corner of the market, then improved fast enough to eventually take over the larger market the incumbents had been protecting all along. The pattern repeats because the underlying mechanism has nothing to do with any specific industry. It's about which market a management team is comparing a new opportunity against, and a genuinely excellent existing business will always make a new one look small by comparison, right up until the new one isn't small anymore. Christensen's own vocabulary for this draws a specific line between two kinds of innovation. A sustaining innovation makes an existing product better for the customers a company already has, which is exactly the kind of investment a strong incumbent naturally favors, since it protects and grows revenue leadership already understands. A disruptive innovation, by contrast, starts out worse by every metric an incumbent already tracks, cheaper, simpler, aimed at a smaller or different customer, but improves fast enough along its own trajectory to eventually outperform the incumbent's product entirely, often after the incumbent has stopped paying close attention. DEC's minicomputers were themselves a disruptive innovation against the mainframes that came before them, cheaper and simpler machines that eventually ate the mainframe's market from below. The personal computer was the same disruptive pattern arriving a second time, this time aimed squarely at DEC's own minicomputer business, and DEC's leadership evaluated it exactly the way the mainframe makers had once evaluated DEC. One practical technique some companies now use to guard against exactly this blind spot is called innovation accounting, a term popularized in lean startup methodology, where a small, disruptive bet is deliberately measured against its own separate milestones and its own separate timeline, rather than being judged against the much larger revenue numbers the core business already produces. That separation matters because judging a small, early bet against your main business's current scale will make almost any real opportunity look like a rounding error, right up until the year it isn't one anymore. If you manage a team or a business unit that is currently winning, here's a concrete habit worth adopting directly from DEC's story. Once a year, ask your team to name the smallest, least impressive-looking adjacent opportunity currently on your radar, and instead of comparing its current size to your main business, ask what it would take for that opportunity to become the main business in 5 years. That single reframing is the exact comparison DEC's leadership never made in 1977, and it's the one that would have actually mattered. It's worth being specific about why this reframing works, rather than just asserting that it does. The moment you ask what it would take for a small opportunity to become the main business, you're forced to think in terms of growth trajectory instead of current size, and trajectory is the only variable that actually matters when you're looking at something new. Current size tells you almost nothing about where a market will be in 5 years, especially early in a disruptive innovation's life, when the entire point is that it starts small and improves quickly along a curve the incumbent isn't tracking. There's also a people dimension to this that DEC's story hints at but doesn't fully explain on its own. Inside large, successful organizations, the engineers and product people most excited about a small, unproven opportunity are rarely the same people running the profitable core business, and they typically have far less organizational power to redirect resources toward what they're seeing. A management structure that only funds initiatives proposed by the people already running the most profitable division will systematically miss disruptive opportunities, not because nobody saw them coming, but because the people who saw them coming had no real path to get resources allocated toward them before a competitor did it first. Some companies have tried to solve this directly by creating small, deliberately separate teams or business units explicitly insulated from the core business's existing metrics and reporting structure. Specifically so a promising but currently tiny opportunity doesn't get starved of resources or attention simply because it looks unimpressive next to the metrics the rest of the company is optimizing for. Whether or not that specific structural fix is right for your own organization, the underlying diagnosis is the one worth carrying out of DEC's story. The people who evaluate whether a new opportunity deserves resources are almost always the same people whose success is currently measured by the business that opportunity might eventually replace. There's a final piece of this story worth sitting with, since it's the part that turns an interesting historical anecdote into something genuinely uncomfortable to apply to your own situation. If you're currently running the most successful part of your own organization, the uncomfortable truth is that you are, structurally, in almost exactly the position Ken Olsen was in back in 1977. Your own strong current results are quietly training you, right now, to judge every new, smaller-looking opportunity against a bar that opportunity was never going to clear early on, by definition, since disruptive opportunities always look unimpressive at first specifically because that's the stage they start at. Recognizing that you're standing in that exact position doesn't automatically solve the problem. But it's the necessary first step DEC's leadership never took in 1977, and it remains the single hardest step for any genuinely successful team or leader to take today, precisely because success rarely announces itself as the thing quietly making you blind to what comes next. A useful discipline borrowed from this story is to schedule that uncomfortable review deliberately, rather than waiting for it to happen naturally, since it almost never does on its own. Put a recurring line item on your own calendar, once or twice a year, whose only purpose is asking what your team's current success might be making you dismiss too quickly, and treat any honest answer to that question with exactly the seriousness DEC never gave to the small, unimpressive-looking machines sitting quietly outside their own market in 1977. It's worth adding one final, uncomfortable detail about how these stories usually end for the people who lived through them. Ken Olsen wasn't removed from DEC in disgrace immediately after his famous quote. He kept running the company successfully for another 15 years, right up until the personal computer's rise had already become undeniable, which is exactly what makes this pattern so dangerous in practice. The warning signs rarely arrive as a single dramatic moment demanding an obvious response. They arrive as a slow accumulation of small, individually forgivable decisions, each one reasonable given the information in front of the person making it at the time, until the accumulated weight of all of them becomes a company that missed an entire era, one defensible quarterly decision at a time. That slow, invisible accumulation is exactly why the fix can't be a single dramatic decision either. Nobody at DEC could have reversed 15 years of quiet drift with one bold meeting in 1990. The only real defense is catching the drift early and often, long before it has 15 years to compound, which is precisely why the scheduled, recurring review matters more than any single heroic moment of insight ever could. It's worth remembering, too, that DEC's own rise had come from disrupting an even older, even more entrenched incumbent, the giant mainframe manufacturers that dominated computing before minicomputers existed at all. DEC itself had once been the scrappy, small, easy-to-dismiss challenger in exactly the position the personal computer occupied against DEC 2 decades later. The company that benefits most from disruption early in its life is very often the same company that gets blindsided by the next wave of it, precisely because winning the first battle so thoroughly convinces an organization that its current way of judging opportunities is the correct one going forward. That full cycle, disruptor becomes incumbent becomes the next disruptor's unwitting target, is close to a law of its own in the history of technology and business, and there is no reason to assume your own currently dominant team or product sits outside of it simply because it hasn't happened to you yet, or because the last several years of results have said otherwise so far. Since that's exactly what every prior incumbent in this cycle also believed right up until the year it stopped being true, usually without much real warning at all beyond the kind that only ever becomes obvious in hindsight. Long after the actual moment anyone could have meaningfully acted on it has already quietly come and gone, entirely unnoticed by anyone in a position to actually do something about it. Follow along for more of these.